Right, good afternoon all. Welcome to the meeting of the Adults, Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Monday the 6th of June, commencing at 2 p.m. Agenda item 1, I've got to pass over to yourself.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Just to confirm that Mr Richardson was nominated as Chairman-elect at the County Council meeting held on the 18th of May for the Chair to be Chairman of this committee. So if I could just ask the committee to make a formal nomination and...
Very happy to propose Terry Richardson as Chairman.
Okay, and could I have a seconder, please?
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm delighted to second
Thank you.
Mr Richardson as Vice Chair. As Chair.
Thank you. As Chairman. If everybody else is in agreement with Mr Richardson being Chairman, then take it as no dissent. Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Welcome to today's meeting of the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can everyone please switch their microphone on when speaking and turn it off when finished speaking? I've received apologies from Mr Chapman and Mrs Fryer is acting as his substitute. We've also received apologies from Mr Haji Nicolaou and Jonathan Morgan is substituting, although I would say at this point in the meeting, because it was very late notice, Jonathan has got to leave about 3 o'clock for another meeting, so he will be disappearing at that point. Agenda item 2, election of Deputy Chairman. Mr Chapman has been nominated as Deputy Chairman, and I'm happy to move this recommendation. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to chair.
Thank you, Mr Chapman. Everybody happy? Yeah. Thank you. Right, we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March 2022. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Any objections?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Barry. Everybody happy with the minutes? Thank you. Agenda item 4, question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 5, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. Agenda item 6, I've not been notified of any urgent items. Agenda item 7, do any members have any interest that they wish to declare? Right, thank you very much for that. Agenda item 8, there will be no declarations of the party whip. Do members have any declarations? No, thank you. Agenda item 9, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. No petitions have been received. So we're now moving on to the first substantive item on today's agenda, is the consultation on the draft Leicestershire and Rutland Carer Strategy 2022 to 2025, as set out in pages 13 to 96 of the agenda's pack. Whilst they're both sitting on the committee, I'm pleased that we have Mrs Fryer here, also in her capacity as Chairman of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and Mr Morgan as Chairman of the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I know the invitation was extended to all spokespersons, etc. of those committees. I'm also pleased to say that we've been joined by Inderjit Lahil, who's the Assistant Director. So welcome. I think we've only met on the internet before, so nice to see you in person at last. And with that, I'll go over to John.
Thank you, Chair. So the report today is an opportunity for committee to comment on both the consultation on the new carers strategy, which was approved for consultation by Cabinet at the end of May, and also to comment on the future tender for carer support services. So the report that we've got today is similar to the Cabinet report in that it covers the consultation on the new carer strategy, which is a strategy that runs across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland and all the health and local authority partners across that area, and builds on the previous strategy from 2018 to 2021. But this report also contains information in relation to the tender for carer support services, which wasn't part of the Cabinet report. So I'm just going to hand over to Inderjit and ask him to take members through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. So just going to give some brief points around the report. So as John said, it's a refresh strategy from 2018 to 2021. So this strategy covers 2022 to 2025 across the LLR patch, including the CCGs. The priorities remain the same as the current strategy. There was quite an extensive engagement process last summer with carers and stakeholders, and the feedback was consistent with the current priorities. Big emphasis on identifying carers across the age ranges, so that's parent carers, young carers, and adults as well. And you'll note that within both the action plan and the strategy, that young carers is quite embedded into the priorities, as well as having its own priority as well. The plan is to launch the consultation, the draft consultation this week, so it's Carers Week this week, with carers and stakeholders, so with the opportunity for them to feedback on anything that they feel they wish to feedback on. And it's a range of mediums. They've got consultation questions, emails, written, and there's a face-to-face event as well, focusing on the consultation. The engagement session that we did in 2021 is referenced in Appendix D. That gives a bit of a breakdown of what carers told us. As part of the Adult Social Care Reform Programme as well, unpaid carers were recognised as a key area for local authorities to support, and we believe that as a council and as a system, with this strategy and the investment within the carer support service, that we've that's both across adults and children's, that we're going to we've got a real insight into what we're going to do with carers. The draft action plan in Appendix C gives, as part of the consultation, so we're expecting carers and stakeholders to input into that. It's a Leicestershire specific action plan, so it's not an LLR action plan, it's our action plan. Each area will have their own action plans. The carer support service, as John mentioned, as part of the report as well, it's currently delivered by Voluntary Action South Leicestershire. Contract values just over 170,000 per year. A fundamental part of that support services around information advice and information sharing and a carers helpline, and we recognise that that's a key requirement for carers across the system. And I know that some of the feedback we've had from as part of our performance reports from the council survey was that carers wanted more information, more advice. So as part of the commission service, we're going to push that agenda forward as much as we can. But just to note as well, the feedback that we've had from carers on the commission service has been really positive. The service that we've got currently is well regarded by carers and by officers as well, but we are expecting additional interest from other providers when the tender's released, and as part of the contract. So we've got a quite lengthy contract here, so we're expecting a level of inward investment into the county, as we look to kind of both strengthen what we've got in the county, but also making links with our council departments, so communities, the communities, the chief exec's directorate, the remits under my remit, so community and wellbeing, library services, adult learning, and community assets. So, and you'll see within the action plan, we've started to make those links more formally to really strengthen what we've got in the county. So that's a quick overview of the paper and what it contains. So happy to take any questions or comments.
Super, thank you very much. You can come again if you're going to be that brief. That's excellent. I think Barry first.
Thank you, Chair. There's a few points I'd just like to go over. One of them, so on page 27 is who the strategy is for. And it talks about people with disability, long-term illness, substance misuse and mental health. It doesn't actually highlight just cognitive decline, which I would have thought would have been one of the main reasons. Now, that could be encompassed under mental health, but I'm not sure that people with cognitive decline would necessarily see themselves as having mental health issues. So I kind of think that maybe that should be expanded slightly to include that. The reason I say that is that as I go through this and I've read this, I've become a carer myself over the past 6 months. My father's 90. We've moved him in with us, and he has some cognitive decline. He's able to do a lot of things himself, but you're there doing those bits and pieces. Now, it's interesting when you get onto obviously what you're trying to do is get this early identification of carers. Now, when I've moved him up, so this is from personal experience, the first thing I did was get him involved with GP. I've got power of attorney, so they knew they could speak to me directly. No one has come to me in any way, shape or form to try and find out if I need. I mean, obviously I'm fine, I've got family around me, we're fine. But no one has actually reached out at all to actually give me any idea of what's available if we do need it. And when I look at it, it's silly, but I mean, I'm reading these reports and I'm getting into not this report, but I think the final report, which is a provisional performance report. And it's not really until I get through to that I start to see the things that I should be looking at. So then I start looking online at various things. I look on the council's website and yes, it worked fine. And a little bit of digging, but I got through. And then you see that you can get things like carers allowance. Really knew nothing about it, etc. So what I would say, and I appreciate what you're trying to do, but it certainly isn't working at the moment. And if we're going to rely on the GPs to do it, that would be my worry. It's outside our control to some extent. If we rely on the GPs, I'm not sure that that's going to work, and you might need to do more within yourselves. And I can let you know in 6 months' time if it's improved in any way, but I'm literally in that situation now, I can see that. The carers register, as I was looking through this, I'm thinking, well, is there a carers register, etc. As I went through, I saw more information. I actually went online last night and registered as a carer, so I can start going through that. But again, I'm a member of this committee. I didn't think I'd need to become a county councillor to find out how I needed to do these things, and that's kind of what's happened. And then finally, just on the young carers thing, what I was interested with that is, obviously we're going to be working with the education establishment, etc. I just wondered what kind of help. So for a young carer, one of the things they could really do with is things like when they're going into exams, giving extra time in exams, because if they're spending a lot of time getting up in the morning to look after somebody before they get in, that really interrupts their day. I just wondered if that's the kind of help we're also looking at giving them, not just giving them some support because they're in education, but making sure the schools recognise that and give those young carers the extra support that they need in various things. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just, happy to respond to that. So your first point around, I guess, information being out there and people understanding where it is and not relying on GPs, I think that's a fair point. The strategy is a council, LLR and CCG document, but at the same time, as a county council, it's about us getting our message out there clearly to the communities. And I was, my first job was as carers consultation officer, and I've been carers lead as well for Coventry Council as well. So I'm fully aware of kind of like how the systems work, and it's not always, the GPs aren't always the best at passing information on. But as part of the support service, that's what we're going to try and push around them getting out there, getting their information out there more consistently, more kind of tightly around what is available for carers and what isn't. And I guess as part of COVID, like COVID came, we're still here, and we're going to start to see more carers, I think, as a result of COVID. And that will mean that we'll start to identify more carers. So research in terms of resources as well. You've got to find out a level of resources about making sure our information is tight, more digitally accessed, etc. So, and I appreciate you as a professional and as a member. You'll have you will know to a certain extent where to access information, but a lot of people don't. I know that for a fact. So it's about us with our commission service be more, I guess, more, not necessarily innovative, but just a bit more smarter around how we reach carers. So that's that point. The point around young carers, I forgot your second point, the point around young carers, it's a really good point as well. We have, within the action plan, we can build what you've said just now into the action plan and work with schools more directly. Whether we can influence that is another question around exam time, like the exam preparation times. The preparation times maybe, but in terms of giving people, young carers, more times in exams, we can explore that 100%, and I'll put it on one of my to-do lists as part of the action plan. I think with our education colleagues, it's a really good point though, and I think that they'd welcome that. But the young carers, I guess, as part of the engagement work we did, young carers didn't actually want their own priority. which is a fair point. But we felt that actually it warranted its own priority. We've tried to embed it in as much as we can. But we'll take that back as part of the feedback from Scrutiny. And what was your second point again?
Just come back, Chair. So the putting down cognitive ability is one of the reasons. And on the school thing, and the reason I say that is I know that they already have a system set up. So for children that may have hidden illnesses and things like that, there is already a system there to allow them to get that. And also when they go into colleges and things like that, they can get laptops and things like that, equipment. So it just makes life easier. And I just kind of think that if that were opened up to young carers as well as those people with disabilities, etc., that might be the sort of thing, because it becomes like a disability in itself, in that you live out that other person's disability, looking after them, and it prevents you from doing the things you would do. So, yeah, I'd appreciate it if you can look into that.
In terms of the cognitive impairment, yeah, we'll change some of the information in the documents to reference that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call Jonathan in, I think the other point that Barry asked, and perhaps that needs to be covered, in fact I've forgotten the point now that I was just going to raise. What was it? My brain's gone dead. Clearly I've got a problem. Under the integrated care system, etc., what is the minimum level we're expecting GPs to contribute to this plan, and etc.? Because, I mean, anecdotally, in fact, in the experience personally, we know that very few people, if any, can actually get to see a GP these days. If you've then got somebody come cross-border, so, I mean, just before my father died, he came to live with us for 6 months. Well, of course, not in the county he came from. And, of course, there's very little, if any, help and support for cross-border. So, as part of the integrated care system, is there a minimum level of support that we should expect, which I think is the point Barry was asking, from GPs? And how will we get that information out to carers?
I'll have a go at that one, if that's okay. So GPs are required to identify people who are carers and have caring responsibilities, and they are required to have a register within the GP surgery. So it should be noted on people's health files that they are carers, and carers should receive an assessment of their own health and well-being through primary care, in the same way that they should through adult social care. I think partly, and often, of course, GPs will be aware of people's caring responsibilities long before we are. So we only become aware of people's caring responsibilities, generally speaking, when somebody is referred to us. We would undertake an assessment and we'd identify that they have a carer or carers. And unless a carer directly contacts the council in their own right, we probably wouldn't know that that anybody had caring responsibilities other than through the assessment of the individual. And we should always identify where there are carers, and we should always, we don't, but we should always offer the carers an assessment in their own right of their caring responsibilities, and that may then lead on to information advice or a carer's personal budget or other support. So GPs are very much in the front line of identification of carers, and as you go through the strategy you'll see that identification is one of the things that carers themselves state as being one of their priorities. I think the point about whether information is available, I mean, carers do tell us that the best place to get information, historically carers tell us that the best place to get information is through GP surgeries, through primary care, because that's the one place that everybody goes. So we can put, and we do put information in libraries, we put information on the website, we put information in council buildings, but the footfall historically in primary care has always been greater, and that's the place where most people reach out for information advice through primary care. Accepting that that has changed somewhat over the last 2 years, we need to rethink that, we need to reflect on those changes. We know, and as you've referenced from the performance report, that information advice is one area where we absolutely need to improve. And I think, we would be open to any suggestions and any thoughts about how we could improve the information advice and where information is disseminated through, what information advice people want. Obviously, our tendered support service, a key element of that is around information advice. But of course, people need to know that that service exists. So I think a lot of it is working through the members, working with voluntary independent organisations, through the third sector, as well as through primary care and through, if people are being admitted to hospital, they should be given their carers and their families should be given information. But it's a task that we absolutely understand we need to take, but it is difficult, I have to say.
Come back to you in a second, if I may, Barry, because I've got lots of people first. So we go to Jonathan next, followed by Jewel.
Okay, thank you very much. There are a couple of things I was going to say actually, but I'll quickly start actually about the issue about GPs and identification of carers. So when I changed GPs and registered in Leicestershire, my son at that point was 2 years old. I was his sort of principal parent, etc. All of the GP forms, I have to say, assumed that I was a woman because only only mums could actually register kids with their GPs. I have to say the language as a result it was slightly skewed. I mistakenly ticked the box that said I was his carer because, as far as I'm concerned, he was 2 years old and he needed a lot of caring. Ever since then, I actually was offered a flu jab every single year because it turns out that actually the definition of a carer is different. And actually the language in this report talks about is the word carer the right way to describe somebody, and clearly if you're slightly new to what a carer actually is, the definition as a result is something completely different, and as a result you tick the box and you get offered flu jabs forevermore. But I'm on a register as a result as a carer somewhere mistakenly with my GP. They never ever challenged that. They obviously knew that my 2-year-old didn't need caring in that sense. Nobody ever actually said, maybe this is the wrong answer to the question. So the point about GPs is, I have to say, they're usually not very good with their admin. Quite often, that's the one thing that we tend to get through health scrutiny as well. But I think probably all individuals individually will understand, especially over the last couple of years, the number of residents that were contacted us who should have been, for instance, offered jabs early, weren't. They had battles with their GPs about getting their records up to date, etc., etc., etc. So our reliance on GPs is not great because they are not always the best way of gathering information. The point about being a carer, all of us at some point now probably have an extended position of whether it's our direct caring, whether it's actually my situation is my mother-in-law, who's a registered carer on the books as such. But effectively, we now care for her because actually it is a huge strain. The point about the amount of emotional, physical, mental pressure that it places on the carer is quite significant. And I appreciate the report goes some way to addressing the mental well-being, particularly of carers, but also there is the physical well-being as well. The fear of falling ill, the fear of not being there to actually do the role of caring, and particularly from the health perspective, we as a country rely immensely on carers filling in the gaps that the NHS and us as society can't fulfil ourselves. And certainly through, again, health scrutiny, the number of times that we've talked to the NHS about the blockages in the system, the fact that people can't be discharged, that the capacities are being challenged, and quite often it's because actually there's nobody to care for the individual once they actually leave the health institutions. And we are completely reliant on not only carers being there to actually provide that care and whether it's from discharge or whether it's from day-to-day needs, but it's the carers themselves, when they are actually also challenged by health, their mental health in particular, often as a direct result of the caring they're carrying out. And it's making sure that, there's reference to respite within the document. But I have to say, from a caring perspective, the fear of not being able to care is ever present, and I do wonder sometimes whether we can support those carers to the extent that actually possibly we can actually try and lift some of that fear and the challenges to mental health that probably go with that. It's not an easy outcome because obviously there are tens upon tens of thousands of carers out there, and what we're trying to do is come up with a policy and an approach that at least is fair and within the resources that we have. But I'm sure, Barry, you're absolutely in that position now, which actually the fear of, well, what happens to me? Who cares for the person I'm caring for? Is ever present for everyone who's in that position. Thank you.
Is that something you want to comment on, or just taking it on board?
I think take it on board. I think they're all very, very, very valid points. And I think within the kind of the country system, I think there's a massive acknowledgement that carers do prop up health and social care systems as well in terms of the monetary value of what carers bring to the economy. So part of what we're trying to do is make sure we've got, like I said, we've got the resource, and it's not an infinite level of resource. It's about kind of divvying that up across as many people as possible. But recognising the fact that we will start to see more carers. So we identify more carers, therefore the resource will stretch even further. But as I said before, that part of the contract and how we're going to work with the new support service when the tender's up and running is looking at different inward investments within the county that we can try and bring in additional monies from other organisations. And as and when the adult social care reform programme kind of embeds itself down and we know what we're doing around some of the more informal carer support, we can start to look at where we can target certain areas. And a lot of carers, are carers because they want to be carers as well, and it's their family members that they're caring for, and it's about not taking that away from them as well, because that's what they want to do, and it's for them, it's the right thing to do. A lot of the other communities in the county as well will have that approach around family and looking after their communities and their old elders and disabled siblings and parents, etc. So it's a fine balance really around kind of supporting people to remain caring, but also not making it a thing where you're kind of what am I trying to say? Not making it a thing where you're trying to like task it, I guess, because it's something that kind of flows with their life. But yeah, I think your point on GPs, I think again, John spoke about it, and I think it's relevant as well. I think what we're going to try and do as well through our wider kind of carers support and carers networks is look at private sector as well, the businesses, the industries around them promoting, what support's out there. And we've talked around GPs being a good kind of access point and a good kind of place to share information, but actually a lot of carers work as well. There is legislation in place around supporting carers with work and work-life balance and unpaid care leave and paid care leave as well. So, we need to get out there in our communities and our work with our private sectors as well.
Over to you, Jill, will be followed by Linda.
Cheers, thank you, Chair. Initiate, nice to meet you. First time, I think. I just want to. I've got 2 points, but I'll raise the consultation one first. So the consultation that we did last year, that you rolled out last year, how did that feed into the draft strategy? What kind of conclusions did you draw from that to feed into this strategy to go for a wider consultation? And I asked that because I just wanted to know what you took out of that response, because there are some start information there, responses there, even though the sample size is small, but none of them are surprising.
Okay, so I'd call it an engagement event in terms of last year's piece of work. So I think the main things that came out of that were, I think carers didn't necessarily relate to the digital element of the priorities. And that's something that within the current strategy we're going to really focus on. So as part of the adult social care technology kind of work streams, that's something we're really going to push. I mean, we can give you more information about what we're doing around technology. So for my view is around where we've got very simple everyday technology. So your Alexas, you know, your FaceTimes, things that you can easily access as everyday people. It's around bringing that into the normal days and normal ways of working for carers. So, you know, I'm going to talk about GPs, but like, you know, speaking to your GP on FaceTime or ordering things through like Amazon and stuff like that, and your online shopping and anything that can make life easier for people. And that's what we're going to push. So at the consultation, I think the engagement carers didn't necessarily relate to that priority, but we felt that we'd want to include that as one of the drivers, because nationally we'll start to see different people and different ways of working. But I think what we want to get away from is you don't have to always develop initiatives. You can use what's already out there in universal services. So as I said before, like, you know, your everyday technology is something you want to push. I think carers related to the identification piece quite well, and that's something we're going to push again around information advice and identifying people early and giving them that support. Young carers, as I said before, young carers didn't want their own priority. We took that away, but we thought actually it does warrant its own priority. But what we have tried to do is embed young carers into the strategy priorities quite heavily, because a lot of this stuff does touch on young carers, absolutely, and as part of parent carers as well. You know, a lot of, I think within the parent carer world, where you've got parents of children with disabilities, it's a different dynamic, really. So you've got parents of children with disabilities who will go to mainstream schools, they'll go to primary bases or resource bases or PRUs or special education schools, but actually they are parents. They're parents in their own right first, but then they are parents of people of children with complex needs as well. And it's about supporting them, you know, to gain that information as they go through to adulthood. And it is a different world in adulthood as well, as you'll probably know. It's a very different world, so it's about preparing them for adulthood as we move forward. So the engagement, I guess, was, you know, it said to us that yes, we've got the priorities right, but the focus on, I guess, on information, advice, identification, the technology piece is something where we need to push further.
Okay, because Chair, through yourself, technology is something that we discussed at our last meeting, because I think we're looking at embedding that into the care strategies going forward, and providing people to be able to be more independent, let's say, at home for longer, but using the technology required. And we're going to invest quite a bit of money in that one. But what I got out of this, and one of the biggest thing I got, and touch on what Jonathan said, 90% of the respondents were female. So we need to tailor our draft strategy to that, because obviously if in a sample group of 62 people, if 90% of them saying actually we're female carers, then that's probably going to be not the same proportion percentage, but proportionately out there in the wider Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland area. You're probably looking at a lot of ladies looking after or taking on caring responsibilities. And I think we have to tailor some of this. So when we're talking about GP surgery, that's only one avenue. But then let's explore other areas where ladies go, women go, that we can explore to you know, say, actually, are you a carer? And you know, Leicestershire provides X, Y, and Z, and we've got a consultation. Because if this small sample saying 90% of people are ladies, then that's the market we should look at. You know, this is the avenues that we should go, because the sample sizes should be bigger. One other thing I drew from that one is as well that it's a lot of people, 49% of people weren't satisfied with what Leicestershire provided currently. So that's a massive sample size, percentage-wise. So whatever we do, we have to address that in our consultation as well, to say actually we recognise that a lot of people aren't happy, not with the service provision as such, but with the total package that Leicestershire providing, as in they didn't know how to access the website, didn't know what provisions were available, didn't know how to access it, all that, and say this is what we will do, and this is what we'll do in the future for better. And the biggest thing is like the most people, when they're looking at technology, is smartphones. They're on their phones a lot of the hours of the time, but that's how I think we could access all our Leicestershire residents. So I know we probably will look at this in the future, but having a Leicestershire Cares app, where actually anybody who's a carer can download that app and have all the resources available at their fingertip, but also, you know, a webmail facility where actually if they've got an issue, it pings a help email, and somebody can pick it up in the contact centre and respond to them. So I think in respect of that, people saying actually we don't know what Leicestershire does for us, it's easy to get it to them on their smartphones, and I think that's one of the avenues that we could look at when we're looking at technology and how to access people who we want to access, because 90% of people will walk on by, but it's those 10% that we need to get who are carers in the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Linda?
That's it, thank you. GPs, personally I don't think it's the right route to go down. I've certainly not seen my GP for probably 3 years now, because it's appointments, telephone appointments only, and you know, we'll ring you within an hour and 6 hours later we might get a call. Being a carer, I have a mother who is 92 suffering from breast cancer, and a mother-in-law who is 92 and at the moment is in the Leicester Royal Infirmary needing a pacemaker. They both live alone. My mother's better off than my mother-in-law because she has 5 daughters and we all muck in and go round and help her. My mother-in-law has just got me and my husband, and my husband, I suppose I'm a carer for him as he has cancer, so I do a lot there. I don't consider myself a carer. Like you said earlier, you're a family member, you do whatever. One of the things that I have found difficult is finding where I can get information from for various different things that mother or mother-in-law or even husband need. It's where I get the information from. And like you say, it's because you're a county councillor, you're probably a bit better informed than somebody out in the street. As I say, my mother-in-law is in hospital at the moment. She has never, why she's there, she's been there probably a week now, nobody has really spoken to us or assessed her. I mean, you can only go in once a day by appointment only to see her anyway. But nobody, as far as I'm aware, has assessed her as needing care, even though she's 92, struggles on her feet. As I say, my mother has had breast cancer for the last 2 years, and we take her to appointments and things like that, but nobody has ever asked about her living circumstances. Which, you know, given this strategy, which is a good strategy, but it needs somebody, it needs, whether it's the hospital or whatever, but somebody needs to alert people to the fact that there's a strategy there that could assist with what people are doing. Because as you say, people like, you know, yourself and whatever, save the country a lot of money in what they do. But just needing that little bit of help and knowing where to get it. You know, I agree that technology is a good thing. I don't have an iPhone. I don't have an up-to-date. Mine's just an old-fashioned thing. You know, apps and things go over my head. You know, I can get onto ModGov and get up the papers. That's about it, you know. I struggle, so somebody else would struggle even more. My mother or mother-in-law wouldn't have a clue. So it's knowing that there is enough information and where to get that information that is going to be vitally important. And I must disagree with you. It shouldn't just be women that it's targeted for, because there's a gentleman sitting opposite who is doing caring. You know, Terry did caring. If I get to the stage, and hopefully my husband's still there, he's going to care for me. So we should target anybody that has sort of any caring responsibilities. I don't think it should be gender defined, but that's just me. Thank you.
Just comment. Yeah, that's a fair point. I think the previous comment was around the response rate to the engagement was 90% of women, but I think a lot of people wouldn't actually, you know, potentially a lot of males wouldn't actually recognise themselves as carers, which is kind of the whole point of identification. On your point around information, etc., I think going back to my previous point, I think it's around, we need to get the information out there widely as possible, and not just through the GPs. I think GPs are an avenue, and like John was saying before, like pre-pandemic there was a lot of footfall, but now less so now. So there's got to be other avenues around it. So that's absolutely something we'll be doing. As I said before, like linking in with our council resources, so in chief execs as the communities work, like Fran's area around the libraries, our adult education services. Lots of different types of people go and access those services, and about us getting that information out as much as possible. But and also the strategy is an LLR CCG strategy. So your point around hospitals and GPs is absolutely relevant. So the strategy isn't for the county to deliver everything. It's a partner strategy. So there's a carer delivery group which oversees the work of the strategy. So I guess what I'll take from this today is to make sure that when we do have the action plan signed off, that we've got proper ownership across some of those more health orientated areas, so your hospital areas. And I think there is, within the CCG, I've been here for 2 months, but within the CCGs there is a recognition for carers. I sense that, but whether it's on the ground, I'm on about more strategy, but on the ground, whether that's probably not as tangible.
Hilary?
Thank you very much. Just a couple of points, but first of all, I would like to agree that it shouldn't just because 90% of the respondents were women doesn't mean it wasn't men being kept. A lot of women fill in the forms anyway, but no, I don't think it should be. Right, and also, I think besides GPs and libraries, and I think this is where you can use counsellors and our connections. In my own village, we have 3 churches. We have 3 for people who are retired or not working clubs that meet every week. There's the people in residential homes. They may only be there for a short time, or because they're on respite care. So I think there are a lot more openings, because sort of GPs and libraries, we're narrowing it a bit, and education. I think we've got to go wider, and I think as counsellors we can possibly help you there, or just give it to us and we'll dish it out. See what I mean? Where to go. I have to slightly disagree with my fellow counsellor over there, Mr. Mear. I'm a bit like Mrs. Broadley. I have a phone. Well, it can take me 20 minutes to work out am I in the right app. Have I done? I've got large fingers and hands. You try and work a phone when you've got hands like this. I'm a touch typist. That's what I was trained at. That doesn't work on a mobile. So I think we have to make sure our information goes as almost the lowest common denominator and work up, rather than stop at a high level and try and hope that it gets down. Now, the other thing I was going to point out was, before my fellow councillors raise those subjects, is from the young carers. I sometimes wonder whether we do actually know all our young carers, because I'm sure that there are some families that won't hold up their hand and say, well, it's my 10-year-old that helps me get undressed, or it's my 15-year-old that makes sure I shower. And I'm wondering whether we actually, and particularly after these 2 years, because our biggest source of information for young carers was often through the education. Well, some of them haven't had proper education for nearly 2 years. And we're losing track. So that is something, and as Chair of Children and Families, that's something we'll be discussing tomorrow. I was just looking at, I've read it 3 times and I'm still quite wrong. On page 17 of the report, point 21, it says feedback from Leicestershire young carers is not included in the engagement as it was received, etc. The young carers requested removal of priority 8, which you've already mentioned, as they would like to be recognised and included on. Albeit, however, young carers in other areas within LLR. So does that mean Leicestershire didn't want it and Leicester City and Rutland did? Right, that's just what I wanted to clear, but I'm glad it has been kept in. But I do think we need to make it as simple as possible, as informative, bullet points, just here's where you go, A, B, C, D. We don't want long explanations because you lose people. My father, who was a senior army officer, said if you can't put it on 2.5 pages of foolscap, I've lost interest. And I think we've got to get back to that. So thank you very much. But those points I'd like.
Thanks, Hilary. I could only cope with 1 page. Barry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking when we're saying about trying to get the message out there, and I think we've established we don't necessarily rely on the GPs to do that. I think back about 9 months ago when COVID was coming to an end as such, or the restrictions, I knew someone that had been unemployed for a couple of years through COVID, weren't quite sure what to do, where to go. Leicestershire Matters came out, had a half-page thing in there about getting in touch with the council. Through that, they got in touch with the council, got some direction. Within a few weeks, they'd found a job. Perhaps what we should do is every Leicestershire Matter should go out with a half-page thing saying, are you a carer? Do you do this? Do you do that? So that it actually makes people realise that they are carers, and these are the lines to get in touch with, whether it's our lines, our emails, putting yourself onto the carers register. But it's something that goes out to every single residence in the county, and it might be a way of getting through. And just put that in every single time so all the new carers come along can see that. It's silly things that you don't realise you miss, Chair, but when we converted our double garage into a flat, it was only through hearsay that we found out that the downstairs wet room was tax exempt, VAT exempt. But it was only, and it's thing which was a considerable sum, but it's things like that you don't even know. And somehow we've got to come up with a way of making sure that when these people, carers, come along, and as you say, they save a great deal of money to the system, that you help them in every way you can, financially as well, to succeed. And I think, the Leicestershire Matters, maybe that's a simple way forward, something we control, maybe something we could consider.
Thanks, Barry. You've read my mind. I've written Leicestershire Matters down here, you see, so obviously great minds think alike. I know that Christine's dying to come in, so...
I'll come in at the end, if that's all right.
All right. Well, just a couple of points from me then. Thanks, Inderjit, for mentioning a bit that worried me about we can't do it all and we shouldn't be doing it all. We've got to make sure we hold other people to account for delivering, particularly in the health services. A couple of questions I had. It just occurred to me after John spoke to an answer to a previous question about, number one, do we not have access to the carers registers that GPs have? And if not, why not? And shouldn't that be something that the care and delivery group can make happen? Because that would be sensible. It can't be that confidential information, because if they're going to tell us anyway, why can't we just have a copy of their register? And secondly, the other way I was going to suggest we get the message out, I found as a counsellor, if you want to get a message to anyone, the best way to do it is to have a bin hanger on their dustbin, because everybody reads it. So use the district councils, get bin hangers put out which are laminated, and much as everybody does with the days of the week, they've got their collections, they will put that on their notice board, and it's the cheapest and easiest way. And I've never quite worked out why we have this obsession with not working with the districts to get out things like bin hangers, etc., and using all these other methods. I totally agree with what's being said here. Simple is easy. And from John's point of view as the Director of Adults Communities, the one thing we need to get the government to do is, I know Barry's going through the same thing. When I helped try to fill out the carer's allowance form for my father, I think I'm reasonably intelligent. And by page 67, I think I was tearing my hair out. So if you can use your officers to impress on ministers that it should be 2 pages and put a bit at the bottom, or as part of the Leicestershire Matters bit we're putting in there, you put an idiot's guide to how to fill one in. That would be great.
Just respond to the good points. Can we get hold of carers registers? Probably not, actually, because it probably is against data protection rules. We can access information about individuals where we have a need to know, but that doesn't include wide databases of information. What we do have, of course, is the shared care record in development. We've reported here a couple of meetings ago, I think, and what we can do is we can talk to colleagues who are developing the shared care record to make sure that there is a carer's flag within that shared care record, because what we'll get is a summary record. We won't get everything, but we can make sure we get a carer's flag. That's a good idea. In terms of working with the districts, absolutely. Very happy to work with the districts, and any help that we can get through the districts. And of course, districts do have connections with people that we don't, on various, revs and bends and everything else. So that's a useful kind of tag as well. But as we said, what we need to do is first identify people and then look at what support people need. But we can't give people support if we don't identify them in the first place. So it's vitally important, really.
Thanks for that, John, and thanks, Christine, as always, as the portfolio holder, for turning up at these meetings. And I know you want to come in and say a few things.
Yeah, all I want to say was I found it very interesting of the points that you brought up. Take on board what Hilary said about involving councillors more, which is, John will know, that I'm always going on and on and on about we really need to use as councillors more to get out some information there. Not all of us councillors have newsletters, but a lot of us have newsletters. Some of those will get our newsletters binned because we don't vote for us. But we would get out probably to 70% of people if we could have a little bit of information of a simple way to contact you, rather than going to, can you buzz number 2 if you want this, buzz number 3, and then you get absolutely, no, I don't want to. And I think we've just got to have some, and I will bring in things, 1 or 2 of these points that have been brought up at our next lead members meeting, which is Wednesday, so it's too late for that. But thank you very much for all the points that you've made, and it's some of the ones that we've already made at lead members meeting. So thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Christine, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of these points under agenda item 13 when we look at the peer review on customer services, because I know John's quite keen on streamlining the procedures there, and I think it's been a good lead-in from this group. So thanks again to Indigit for coming. I hope you're still enjoying it 2 months in, and having now met me in person, which is always a downside to any job. And I think this committee has always been, tried to be proactive and helpful in its comments, and we're grateful for bouncing things off us and giving us a chance to have a say, because we're all desperately keen to do the same thing of do the best we can for our residents, but also make sure everybody shares their responsibility across the piece, rather than us trying to do everything ourselves. We got to hold, as I said, others to account, and we rely on you to do that. So thanks once again. Right, we're now moving on to, I think we're past our comments. I don't think there's anything specific I had to do at the bottom of the report, was there? No, that's it. I suppose the only other thing, Christine, would be that at some point when it would just be nice if you can come back and with John give us an update on how the contract negotiations specific to Leicestershire are going. I appreciate it's not the right time here to do it, but we'd just be interested to know what information we've taken from the strategy which we're going to put into our contract, because I said the one thing I put down on here is that in the world we live in, having a call centre that's only open 9 till 5 is no good to anyone these days. And I think that's a careful, or 9 to 4:30, so carers knock off at 4:30 on a Friday, which somewhat amuses me, but there you go. So thank you for that. We're now moving on to agenda item 11, which is progress update on the development of the Archives Collections and Learning Hub, as set out in pages 97 to 104. I'm delighted to say we've been joined by Fran Wills, who's Head of Service. Hello, Fran, nice to see you again. And I think Indigit's taking this one, or is it you first, John?
I'll introduce you, that's all right, Chair, and then pass on fairly quickly on to Fran. It's a couple of years, I think, since we brought a report to committee on the Collections and Archives Hub. You recall back in 2018 and 2019 we were having conversations about the redevelopment of the record office, the current record office, which is in Wigston, and bringing that together with the various museum collections that we have around the county onto a single site to provide a better offer and a more rationalised approach. At that point we were looking potentially at a facility on the front of County Hall, We then, and of course, entered the pandemic, and quite a lot of work was paused for obvious reasons. So we've sort of started to review where we were with that work, and a project team have come together to have a look at the various options. And Fran's now just going to update us in terms of where we've got to with those options.
Hi everyone. Thanks for that. Yeah, so this is really to update on where we've got to. As you'll probably be aware, the Council's archive, museum collections and creative learning services operate from 6 buildings spread across the county. In paragraph 4 of the report, it outlines some of the various drawbacks associated with those current spaces, principally lack of storage capacity and poor condition being the most pressing issues. As John has said, in June 2018, Cabinet gave approval for work to begin on realising a vision for a new archives, collections and learning hub here on the County Hall campus to provide public access to a range of cultural resources and also to ensure secure and environmentally sound conditions. A 2-phase development was identified at that point as the preferred option, but prior to undertaking a costed feasibility study, work was paused due to the pandemic. We restarted work on the project towards the end of last year, and in light of the pressure on the capital programme, but also potential opportunities arising from the Ways of Working programme, we commissioned Pick Everard to undertake a feasibility study into any potential new options. Paragraph 13 of your report outlines the options that were considered. So these were A, to convert existing space in the Penloyd building and Rutland building. So Penloyd is the building that we're in at the moment, and the Rutland building is to the rear of the site but connected to this building. That was assessed as being unsuitable because there was insufficient space and the access arrangements for the building would not be suitable, so that wasn't progressed any further. Option B was a new build strong room on what we call the sunken garden site. So there is an area of grassed area to the front of the building, just in that direction, and also adaptation of the room called G60, so existing office space in Penloyd for the public resource facilities needed for the record office, and then adapting the Eastern Annex, which is the building to the rear of this site, for the other elements of the hub. Option C was to build new strong rooms adjacent to the Eastern Annex and adapt the rest of that building to provide all the elements of the archives, collections and learning hub in a single space. And then D was a complete new build on the County Hall campus, again providing all the elements of the hub in a single space. The feasibility study showed us that options B to D remained within the original financial parameters that were brought to Cabinet in 2018, although the upper cost estimate had actually reduced slightly. At this stage, option C is identified as the preferred option, so new build strong rooms adjacent to the Eastern Annex and then adapting the rest of that building. The reasons for that are detailed in paragraphs 17 to 23 of your report, but in summary, it delivers the vision of an integrated facility at the lowest cost. Paragraphs 24 and 25 outline the service benefits of option C, which include some financial savings as well as benefits to users. Paragraphs 27 to 31 outline the resource implications for option C, including, just to point out that it does include provision of additional inflationary risk contingency given inflationary increases at the moment, and also project staffing costs. Paragraphs 36 to 38 outline the timetable for decisions, which would start with the appointment of professional architectural services and a project team that would carry out the elements of the work that are detailed in paragraph 37C. This will include an overall design, review of costings, and a more detailed delivery plan, including timescales. Assuming this approach is approved, further reports will be brought to Scrutiny and Cabinet as appropriate. I know a number of Scrutiny members have taken the opportunity recently to visit some of our spaces that we currently work from, and I'd like to thank you for finding the time to do that, and I hope you found it informative. I understand a concern was raised about potentially building on car parking adjacent to the Eastern Annex. Just to say that a full parking assessment would be undertaken as part of the development of the design, and that will quantify any reduction in parking spaces. However, at this stage it's anticipated that following landscaping the reduction in car parking spaces would be minimal. I'll pause there and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Fran. Before I open for questions, I would only comment, I've been on this committee long enough to know that the committee at the time when I first won it, was preferred option was always option C. So I think it's nice that it's gone full circle and is actually coming back to the right decision now as opposed to the decision that's made. I suppose all we'd say is that we've got whatever is decided, and when Cabinet make that decision, it's got to be acted on quickly. We can't just let this drag on and on. I think is probably going to be the view of the committee, but I think I've got Barry first, followed by Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I managed to visit the Records Office, the Barrow and Saul site and the Eastern Annex. And what I would say is you've got some very dedicated staff that have been in those positions for a very long time. And in fact, that's extremely important, because when people visit the Records Office, people with that knowledge, with that history of understanding where things are, it's critical. It's, you know, a very dedicated team, I found. It was fascinating seeing everything. It was quite a surprise to just see the sheer amount of archives, the amount of material. It was very disappointed to see how much of it is not being kept in the conditions that it needs to be kept in. And not just the fact that some facilities at Barrow and Saul it's dry, etc., but you get temperature variations and things like that, and that's very detrimental. When I look at this report and I see that this has been kicking around since 2017, that's 5 years, you know, you do just sit there thinking, let's get on with this, because whatever it costs, this is stuff you can't replace, and we'll lose stuff if we don't get on and do something. I'd certainly agree, from having seen all the various things and talked to the staff in depth, option C certainly looks to be the best way forward. And what I'd love to see is that more of this stuff is available for people to see easy. I mean, it'd be lovely to just have a Leicester Museum, wouldn't it? But I mean, I understand costs won't allow that, but to do more with what we've got, to let people see, because I love history, and I found it fascinating to go around and see the stuff, and felt quite privileged that there's not that many people that probably get the chance to see as much as that, and the more we can put that out to the public, the better. But it's been an interesting, programme. It's got my full support on option C. The only thing I would say, having looked through this report and listening to yourself, what are our timescales? What are we actually let's put some milestones down so that we've got something to work to, because this has obviously kicked around for 5 years. Maybe we need to get some dates down on the table of where we expect to be over the next period. So if you've got any information on timescales, I'd be very interested.
Thanks, and thank you for acknowledging the staff, and I will take that back to them. They are an amazing team. Just on the point on timescales, what we hope is, if the approach is approved, that we can move really quickly to commission those design architects and the project team, and their first piece of work will be to actually develop that detailed timeline alongside the costed design. So if everything went well and smoothly, it would be nice to think we could be bringing a report back to you in the autumn. And then obviously things would progress through there. I mean, it is quite a complex project in terms of it being on the campus, so there will need to be some work and discussions about what timescales fit with other priorities on the site, but hopefully we can come back relatively quickly on the first sort of stage.
Yeah, just to add to that, as Fran said, we really do need the detailed costings in order to understand the affordability and the timescales. We then need to obviously take a view as a whole council of the capital programme, because as you're well aware, the capital programme is under significant pressure. It's a very large capital programme. We'd have to talk to colleagues across the council about how we would then take that forward as part of that capital programme, and what the priority of the capital programme would be, and that would be for members to determine as part of the MTFS process.
Just before I pass on to Linda, John, a question that arises from this, and it follows on from the question that Barry's asked. A lot of these records we have to keep by law. We've got a deteriorating collection, so if the capital budget can't be found, what is the option? Because it's got to be done. So to me, there is no option but to spend the money, unless you know something different to I do, because otherwise we're not fulfilling our legal obligations. Is that not the fact?
Potentially, yes, and certainly in terms of the archive and in terms of the Records Office, we are pushed for space, as well as, you mentioned some of the environmental and other conditions, and certainly the Arts Council will take a view in terms of whether or not we are in a position to have our accreditation approved in due course. And it would obviously be difficult and challenging if that were not the case. But along with, as I said, we do have a legal duty to maintain the archive. We also, of course, have other duties around roads and transport and highways and schools, and so there are a number of priorities that members will have to kind of consider in terms of the capital programme going forward.
Sorry to delay your question, Linda.
That's quite all right. Obviously, the residents in Oby and Wigston were very disappointed, especially as the Records Office is in my division. We did get lots of comments and upset that it was going to be moved from there. It is well used there. And my only concern, I understand why it's got to be done. I understand that it will hopefully, after the initial cost, save money because of the buildings that can be used for something else. But it's the accessibility for residents that bothers me, and has done since we talked about this. As I say, it's going ahead. I know it's going to go ahead, and whether I'm going to be told this isn't the correct place to say it, I'm going to say it anyway, is that it's got to be accessible for residents to be able to look at this marvellous collection and everything. And given the bus service around here, which isn't brilliant, can something be, whether it's at this committee or at another committee, done to make sure that if it comes here and it's a fantastic collection, that people can actually get to see it, because that is the aim. As well as preserving it, the aim is for people to be able to see it in one place, and that is, it's fine, it's going ahead, but my concern is people seeing it. Thank you.
I suppose just one point, sorry Chair, just to respond that there will be a full travel plan as part of the development, so those issues will be looked at, and it absolutely acknowledged the disappointment of the local residents that have become really familiar with using it, and it's difficult choices to try and find kind of a long-term sustainable solution. But the whole point of this is to make it easier for more people to be able to come and access.
Hilary next, followed by Barry.
Thank you very much. Well, I should possibly declare an interest because the Barrow and Saw one is in my division, and I've been there a few times. But again, for other people, it's not easy from Oadby and Wigston to get to Barrow upon Saw. So wherever it's centralised, for some people it's not easy. It's not easy for us to get to Oadby and Wigston by public transport, so vice versa. And Mrs. Broadley already indicated there will be some. I take up the point that we have other demands upon the council's funding and services, but we're making 6 sites into 1 site. So I presume that of those 6 sites, the council own most of them or have a financial interest in them. So there must be some financial benefit from closing it. I know, but also we've got to look, by making it in one place, I might want to go and have a look at some of the stuff that's in the Barrow-on-Saw one, which is quite industrial and it covers all sorts of things. I might also want at the same time, while I'm here, I'd quite like to go to the record office to look up who lived in my house or something. So there is that benefit that it is on one site, whereas people, I'm sure, aren't using all the sites till their full capacity because it is scattered. So I'm just thinking there must be some financial benefit. I know we've got the capital expenditure, but then these other buildings, I mean, the one in Barrow-on-Saw is on an industrial estate. There are always people that wanting, it's a smallish site, it's got good communication in some way, it's just off the A6, it's near the A46, there's a station in the village and things. So those industrial sites are quite financially good for some other use. So I just think that it'd be interesting. I presume when we do the costings and everything, that the income saved from the current 6 sites and the possible use of those 6 sites is put into a easily understood document to countermand the cost of actually doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. In paragraph 29, there is a small table, and it is a summary table, but you can see there the savings that would be released from the different buildings. So there are some buildings that are council owned, there are some buildings that we rent and we lease, which we would hand the lease back, and there are other buildings that are either suitable for sale because we own them, or actually we would commercially let them as an organisation. So, I mean, obviously, as John said, those costings will be much more detailed as we kind of progress through the stages, but as an indicative idea, that gives you a sense of the scale of those savings.
Barry?
Thank you, Chair. I would say that, yes, there are costs. There are also concerns when we look at our residents. But the reality is the highest priority to me is the preservation and the security. So the barrier on Sol was broken into a little while back. They showed us the evidence of the spray paint graffiti across paintings and things like that. And when I spoke to every single member of staff, there was not a single voice of dissent. Every one of them couldn't wait for this to go through, because for them, in their job, preservation is everything. And it might be more difficult for some people to get to, etc. It might cost more. It is good cost savings and various things, but I think the preservation is the important thing. And if every member of staff is behind it, then you know you're doing the right thing. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Barry. I think there's probably agreement. People shout at me if there isn't. I think that as a committee, we welcome the recommendation for option C of conversion of the Eastern Annex. I don't see any dissent, so I think I'm right. I think as a committee, we would urge Cabinet to take this with the highest priority in timescales, etc. I think one of the frustrations we have at this committee, and we've had this before with other ones, is that we become a bit siloed. So we look at it from the point of view of the collection, and as has been mentioned over here, we don't get the whole story because we've got sites which are worth it. The site in Wigston must be a valuable site, and therefore we would like to see, for instance, and something the portfolio holder can take away back to Cabinet, is potentially the proceeds of the sale of that site ring-fenced to cover some of the costs of actually development of the Eastern Annex, rather than just going into the assets pot. Because I think there are some times when we should hypothecate funds coming in for specific reasons, because it doesn't detract from the budget, because we didn't have the budget in the first place, so we didn't have the money coming in. So if we're having the money coming in for the same thing, so I think we would urge, probably through you, Christine, rather than the officers, to talk to your colleagues in Cabinet and say, look, can you hypothecate this money and keep it for this purpose to go forward? And I think that's, and again, I think it's a slight frustration with the silo mentality in the committees, where sometimes we could have done with the assets person here to explain what they were going to do with the money, what they might get, and why it can or can't go towards the cost of this development. And I think that would be useful going forward. But the message to Cabinet is, get on with it, please, very quickly. Make a decision very quickly. Get the thing built quickly. Preserve these collections and use any money you can get coming in from the sale or leasing of those assets to secure the collections and archive for future generations. I didn't get any tomatoes thrown at me, so I think it's unanimous from the committee. So thank you all, and thank you, Fran. We're now moving on to agenda item 12, which is an update on the social care reform programme as set out in pages 105 to 136 of the agenda pack. I know we've got a presentation on this item which will come first, I suspect. John, are you going to introduce it?
Thanks, Chair. I think we've got Christine Collingwood joining us virtually, and Christine's going to load the presentation. Oh, there we go, seamless. So this is the third or fourth report I think we brought to committee around the adult social care reform programme. This one is focusing on two things really. First is the overall governance, and to give committees some information around the size and scale of the reform programme, and to give some assurance to committee that we are working on the programme, that we've got a governance process in place. And then the second part of the presentation is a little bit more in-depth look at the CQC assurance process as far as we know it. So as part of the reform, the overall reforms, one of the government's objectives is to undertake assurance of all local authority adult social care functions to make sure that we are complying with the Care Act responsibilities. And so Christine's going to take us through a little bit of detail, as much as we know at the moment, about what CQC are planning as part of that process. So the first element of the presentation, I'll just whip through very quickly the governance parts of the presentation. If Christine, you want to move us forward. And again, so they're the main elements of the reform programmes: charging reform, the social care system reform, and the integration reform through the Health and Care Act and the Integration White Paper. And we've discussed those previously. Next slide, Christine. So what we're seeking to achieve through the programme that we've set up is to address all of the requirements of the reform programme across all 3 white papers through a single reform programme, a single governance process. And as it talks about there, wanting to ensure that we've got sustainability for the council, but also making sure that we are in that process improving outcomes for people. Next one, Christine. And the overarching objectives of the reform programme are there, so to make sure we've got a robust plan to mitigate against any financial, reputational or legal risk, to ensure that the costs of the reforms are understood, and we'll be seeking to probably bring a report in September to committee on that point around the overall costs of particularly the charging reforms. To make sure we've got the processes and systems in place and the policies in place that we need, as well as looking at the demands on the council, and to make sure that we are meeting all of our national and policy objectives. So the next one, Christine. So you probably can't see the detail of that, but it sort of just explains, so we've got the overall programme, we've got 8 work streams that sit underneath that. So we've got work streams around market sustainability, assurance, workforce, charging reform, finance, systems and digital, policy and communications and engagement, and integration. And then underneath each of those there are various work tasks that need to be undertaken over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. So it's an extremely complex piece of work and very challenging. We've got the governance in place. We've got the programme manager, Christine, who's going to take us to the next part of the programme, is the programme manager. We've got, as you'd imagine, we've got all sort of the risk registers in place. Each of the work streams is scoping the particular work that they've got to do at the moment. We're coming up with an overall timeline of activities, and we're developing our communications and engagement plan, because quite a lot of the work that we'll need to do is not just understanding actually what's required, but engaging with the wider public. And, you know, go back to what we were saying about carers, identification and communication. A large part of this work is about making sure that people in the wider community, not just those who use services now, but people who may need to use services in the future, or whose family members may need to understand the reforms and understand how things are changing. So there's quite a lot of engagement work that we'll need to undertake, as well as understanding the full resource requirements. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the governance. And Christine's now just going to take us through a bit more of a detail about what we understand the CQC assurance process will look like.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so we have been given some insight into what the Care Quality Commission are going to be looking at when they come to do their assurance visits to local authorities. And so their methodology will be very much based upon information gathering around the local authority to look at how they're performing. And I think this assurance process is very important reputationally for us as a local authority, because there are some real implications around for the local authority should CQC consider that we are not meeting the required standard. If they feel that we're not meeting them substantially, they may ask us to work closely with another local authority to bring us up to standard. But there is the potential that if they felt that we were failing, the government would be informed and we could be moved into special measures. And so the importance for us to get this right and to collect and present the best possible picture of the local authority is quite important. CQC have told us that they're going to be focusing around 4 key themes when they look at the local authorities. It'll be how we work with people, and that's how we look at people's needs, provide support, choice and control. It'll be how we provide support for individuals, and that's a bit around our provider market commissioning, integration and working across partnerships. It's about ensuring that we provide services safely, so it's around safeguarding, positive risk taking, focusing on key areas of risk, and it's about leadership. And this is particularly where groups such as Overview and Scrutiny really comes into play, because it's showing our governance procedures, how we link into and listen to the voices of other people. So the following slides are taken from a presentation made by the Care Quality Commission that just highlighted in a bit more detail the sorts of things that they would be looking at under each one of these themes. We should say that they'll be using quite a number of different ways in which they will measure how we perform against each of the themes. The first will be specific evidence and quality indicators, which are underpinning data, reports that they will expect us to produce, and all of our underpinning stuff that we have, like the health and wellbeing strategy, our departmental strategy and other plans. Second will be they will take time to go out and speak to people. So they'll be talking to staff and leaders, feedback from partners, they'll be observing processes. They'll also be looking at quality standards. And one of the things that was quite clear is that they were quite keen on WE statements. And these are the standards in which we hold our providers, ourselves and others to account. And then there's how we work with individuals and the thoughts and feelings of individuals who receive our services. And so the first area was how local authorities work with people. And so it's very much around how we assess people's needs, and the I statements that go with those are around people feeling that their care is coordinated, their support enables them to live the life they want to. It's how we support people to live healthier lives. And again, the I statements are people feeling that they get good information and advice around their health. And then, as we can see here, and I know you probably won't be able to see the detail of this slide, there's a whole raft of evidence that they will be looking at to underpin the work that we do to work with people. So it'd be feedback from people who use our services. It'd be the carer strategy that we were talking about earlier, how we work with carers. There'd be some specific data that they look at, and they'll also want to talk to groups such as yourselves and show how we link into the decision-making process. And that's, if I can go on to providing support. Again, this is how we work in ensuring that the services that people can access are of good quality, that we have sufficient workforce to undertake activities, and we're looking at developing integration and partnership working. And again, when you were talking about the carers strategy, it was about joining things up and ensuring that we hold people to account for delivering specific parts of a holistic strategy for individuals. So it's about people feeling that their care and support is coordinated and everybody works well with them. It's about us proactively working to support staff and partners to deliver safe, integrated, person-centred care. And it's about ensuring that our workforce is diverse, and we work towards clear and fair culture by improving the equality and equity of people who work for us. And again, there's a whole raft of evidence that will be used in order to for us to tell the story and how we deliver providing support. They will go out, they will speak to partners, but we'll also have lots of underpinning information that we provide. Feedback from user and carer surveys, feedback from our own staff, our own training and processes, evaluation of integrated services. So it'd be a whole plethora of information that will be used. And again, the next couple of slides go through even more information that they will be looking at, such as our workforce strategy, etc. Looking at safely, it's about people ensuring that they can be able to be safe and be able to use services safely. So it's about really being planning for where people go, and the I statement is when they move between services, there's a plan for what happens next, that people feel safe and supported to understand and manage risk, and very specifically linking towards safeguarding, how we ensure that people are safe and supported to understand and manage risks. And again, there's a whole plethora of information that the CQC would want to look at, particularly things such as MAREC processes, safeguarding assessments, how we quality assure safeguarding. They would want to speak to other departments on how we work across to ensure that safeguarding is looked at holistically in a family-centred way. And again, even more information around how we train and develop our staff to ensure that they are aware of safeguarding and its importance. And then finally, they will be looking at leadership. And I think what they're looking at is governance around people having clear responsibilities, roles and systems of accountability, looking at learning, improvement and innovation and ensuring that leadership promotes that, and having capable, compassionate and inclusive leaders who can help support individuals at all levels. And again, there's a whole raft of information that they would want to look at. They would go out and perhaps talk to carers groups, complaints, compliments and feedbacks, and how that is used to shape services, governance and audit records, our quality assurance processes, how we report back on incidents, how we work in a joined up way with our local partners, and then ensuring that we have a sufficient leadership structure, that there's effective communications and engagement taking place. So this, you can see, is quite a comprehensive list of the sorts of evidence that CQC will be looking to gather in order to develop a picture of the local authority and how it's delivering social care in the area. And so just to finish, we're doing a lot of work at the moment to look at pulling together and perhaps get ahead of the curve on how we can pull together the evidence base for Leicestershire. So we're already starting to audit and pull together the documentations. We're working with colleagues across the East Midlands to share best practice and look at where we can work collaboratively. And we hope to have a draft self-assessment against each of the 4 themes by the end of September, so that we can identify any gaps or areas of development. And we're also looking at developing some baseline surveys for the public based around the I statements and for our staff based around the we statements, so that we can see where we are at this current time and use that as a benchmark to see how things develop over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Joel.
Chair, thank you, Chair. Very comprehensive presentation on what to expect. I was a bit confused with the timeline. So we're going to have a report back in September with more details. But when's the timeline for the implementation of this new strategy? I can't remember. Going back to the thingy. So that was my first question. I've got one more. Thank you.
Okay, I'll. So well, it's a number of reforms that are taking place through 3 different white papers, and each one's got different timelines attached to it.
Oh.
So charging reforms come into effect in total by October 2023, but we will have to start assessing some people against those reforms in April 2023. The assurance work that Christine's just outlined, we are still waiting for the definitive timelines, but from what we gather, it will start. The process will start in 2023-24.
Okay. Yeah.
But some of the data gathering and the evidence gathering will start before that, obviously, to inform that assurance process. And there are then various timelines around different aspects of the integration agenda, of course, starting with the formalisation of the ICSs in July of this year. So it's kind of a moving piece over the course of the next really 18 months. There are various timelines. Perhaps one of the things that would be useful would be to, when we come back in September, to bring the highlights. We're trying to develop a 1-page kind of timeline that shows when all of these things need to be completed by. So perhaps when we come back in September, we could bring that.
Okay, brilliant. No, that's fine. My following question on that is, I think, Chair, this is going to have one of the biggest financial impacts for us, because obviously the goalposts are shifting, and it's shifting in favour of the care, people receiving the care in some respects because of the cap. When will we know how big that impact will be, financial impact will be? Have we started number crunching already? And will that be presented to us in September, or would we have to wait further on? Because obviously, if it's 2023, then it has to inform the next budget process.
Yes, indeed. And the Director of Corporate Resources would dearly like an answer to that question too. As Christine and I, we are working on that, and we are hoping to have at least some ballpark information fairly soon, and that's certainly what we want to bring you in by September, ahead of the MTFS planning. The figures are extremely large by any calculation. There are various different methods of calculation and different organisations undertaking work in this space. So we've had some recent information from colleagues in Newton, Europe, who've been doing some national work with the County Councils Network to try to cost this up. We've got the information that came from government originally as part of their impact statement. We've got some information from a company called Lang & Buisen, which are a company that supports the private sector markets, and we're bringing all that together and trying to make sense of that. But we're probably looking at anywhere between, I think the lower end estimates would be an additional 20 million a year for Leicestershire. The high end estimates would be an additional 60 million a year for Leicestershire. Over a 10-year period, talking 200 million up to £500 million as potential costs. And I mean, that's a huge range, I accept, but you know,
20 million is
trying to make sense of that at the moment. And there are so many unknown variables in terms of how many people will approach the council. We don't know what the individual wealth of individuals are in terms of their assets and in terms of their income. The council currently commissions about half of the total caring in Leicestershire. So, you know, if we're currently working with 8,000 people, then there's another 8 to 10,000 people funding their own care. So, yeah,
it's a big exercise.
It's a difficult calculation.
Okay. Cheers, thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, John and Christine, for the update. I think as we discussed in the chair and spokesperson's briefing at the start, this is probably going to have, or these 3 white papers have the potential to probably have the biggest impact on this council over the remaining duration of this term of the council. And a couple of things just occurred to me. I mean, everything that goes with these 3 white papers will affect most of our residents and will certainly affect every county council. So number one, it just strikes me at some point perhaps a whole members briefing would be useful rather than just this committee, because I think there is an overspill across Scrutiny Commissioner, across the finance people, etc. It also strikes me, and I'll probably make this rash offer on behalf of this group, that if you and the portfolio holder felt that some sort of joint task and finish group to look at some of the detail would be useful as a working group, because I just worry whether this committee would be able to do it justice in a report amongst several reports as we get to some of the more crucial stages of it. I think we might want a, off-camera deep dive into some of the stuff just to see if we can add value and assistance on the corporate governance side. So I hope I'm not being rash on offering that on behalf of members of this committee who might want to get involved. Because as you say, this is such a large fundamental change with 90% of it unknown that we welcome these updates. I said thank you again to Christine for the briefing on the CQC side of it. Thanks to you, John, for keeping us there. But I think what we're saying is, as a committee, we recognise the substantial amount of work that's involved, the substantial impact on the council, and we're happy to play our part in assisting our cabinet colleagues, particularly in hopefully having the information to come to the right decisions, which they're going to have to make when they produce the draft budget for full council going forward in years to come. So I hope that gives some thought that we're behind it, but thank you for that. Any other questions? Right, so thank you there. We're now moving on to agenda item 13, which is the peer review of the Customer Services Centre, as set out in pages 137 to 142 of the agenda pack. We've again got John here, but he's also joined by Steve Pugh, who I think foolishly came in very early on. I can't believe, Steve, you thought we were going to be up to that stage of the agenda at whenever it was, 2:20 or something. Who's joined us? I suppose you're going to kick off, are you, John?
Yeah, very, very briefly, Chair, given the time. So notwithstanding what we've just said about CQC's new assurance process, we have had a sector-led improvement process in adult social care for the last 10 to 15 years. It's run on a regional basis. It's a national programme, but it's run on a regional basis. So we undertake various improvement activities across the East Midlands with the 10 authorities in the East Midlands. As part of that improvement programme, there is a regular peer review process whereby colleagues from other East Midlands authorities will come in and take a look at Leicestershire, and we'll go out and we'll take a look at other colleagues' work. We had a peer review earlier this year in Leicestershire, which was led by the Director of Adult Social Services in Nottingham, together with colleagues from Nottinghamshire, Derby, Northamptonshire. And they came and had a look at what we were doing and gave us some areas for improvement, as well as identifying some strengths. I'm just going to ask Steve if he'll take members through how that peer review and the outcomes of the peer review and what we're doing to address those. Steve?
Okay, yes, thanks, John. Yes, I mean, the peer review gave us that independent information about how certainly our customer service centre operates at the moment. Some of it wasn't necessarily new news to us, but it was good in terms of, well, first of all, there was an awful lot of engagement from colleagues across corporate resources and adult social care. As it says in the report, the current customer service centre is run on behalf of adult social care by corporate resources, so that they operate, if you like, the very first bit of our front door service, where they're providing the information, advice and guidance, and then they will escalate cases through the process to adult social care community support workers. So the function is split, and we've been mulling over for a while about, is that still a sustainable model, bearing in mind call centres operate more for things like reporting things, so it operates very well for environment and transport, but does it still have a place in operating for adult social care, bearing in mind the types of queries that we get? So they asked us to think about it again, and it was something that we had openly put forward about looking at how that customer service centre operates. And it is something that we are going to take forward. We've discussed it with corporate resources. I think everybody is on board that the current model needs a rethink and an overhaul. And at the moment, we have different sets of key performance indicators. So, for instance, the corporate resources part of it is looking at call answering and how the numbers of calls it answers. We're, from adult social care, are particularly interested in the quality of the outcome for people. So bringing it under one management structure would have an awful lot of advantages, and that is something that we are trying to take forward and work through how best to move us forward from where we are now with that split responsibility for the function to one function under one management structure. The other thing that, not just in the customer service centre, we're finding it across the council, and we know from our peers, they also reported, it's a bit of a double-edged sword for us, really. We're very successful at being able to bring people into the organisation at the corporate resources end. They go through quite an in-depth induction. It takes a long time for them to get skilled up, but then there is the opportunity for them to move on and progress throughout the organisation. So they tend to move to our tier 2, and then some of them move into core social work. So it's an excellent career path, and we're looking at how we can lever that as part of our recruitment campaign, because we know that trying to recruit people at the moment is quite difficult, and it is a challenge for us, and particularly for the CSC tier 1s, because we're successful at being able to move them on. We're constantly creating vacancies and induction for that part of the operation. So again, looking at how we bring the two aspects together might give us some more flexibility in how we arrange the structure and the balance between what's called the tier 2 people and the tier 1 people. So that's our main focus at the moment. We're also looking at some of the other items that were suggested by the peer review, particularly around how we do get a good set of measures so that we can be tracking the outcomes for people. Also making sure that we have a function that enables people who can't use our services 9 to 5. I was interested in talking about carers earlier. We a few years ago we introduced a portal for carers to be able to go onto that and find information and look at carers allowances they could get, and we found the uptake of that out of hours fitted in around their patterns of care. And you know, not everybody can ring the customer service centre between sort of 8:30 and 5, so looking at our digital offer for those who can access services and information and want to access services and information digitally is another area that we're looking at, and that can be through extending the range of information that we put on our customer portal, as it were, for people to self-serve, and that also involves professionals as well, so professionals can do online referrals, but also to try and look at and simplify the amount of information that we've got there. We've got lots and lots of really good information on our website. Quite often, though, it's quite difficult to find, or it's written in such a way that we there's an opportunity for us to simplify that as well. So those are the sort of two real aspects that we're focusing on at the moment that came out of the peer review. There were some other minor improvements that you can see in the report, and again we're following up on those, but the two main ones are that how do we improve our digital information advice and guidance, and how do we tackle this structural issue within the customer service centre, and particularly around retention and recruitment.
Right, thanks, Steve. And the first question's with Linda.
Well, thank you, Chair. Quite a lot to take in there, really. I agree that it should be within the Adults and Communities Department rather than the corporate resources, because of the nature of the questions people are going to be asking. Some of it could be quite personal, and they don't want to say it to one person then to have to repeat it to another, because not everybody is knowledgeable about everything. So if you're going to go to the correct department, it's going to be beneficial to whoever is ringing. With regards to the recruitment and retention, as I said this morning, these type of jobs, caring jobs and whatever, tend to be very low paid, tend to be done by women, but not always. But they are low paid, and people, when they get the opportunity to get more knowledge and to be able to move on, they will move on. And so something, yes, does need to be done. But you're talking about digital again, but even the call centre, we've moved into an area where people now work from home. One of the ways that I would see of retention, certainly when my daughters were young, a long time ago, mind, I wanted to be able to work the hours that suited me, because, well, just suited school time, my husband at work, I went out in the evenings and worked when they were very small. The call centre, if people are working from home, doesn't necessarily have to be 9 till 4:30 or 8 till 4:30. And like you say, carers, they don't stop at 4:30. They don't start at 9 o'clock. They can start at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm not suggesting a call centre should be open 24/7, but it could be open a lot longer, because if people are working from home, and that, to me, certainly people with young families and even with caring responsibilities, that is an ideal opportunity to retain somebody, because it suits their lifestyle. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about cost, money, and increasing wages, but you would retain people, certainly young families, for a lot longer. So it's a mixed bag that you've been given, and I'm glad to see that you are taking on board a lot of the positives with it, and I look forward to a conclusion when it's all finished. Thank you.
Do you want to come back, Steve, on that point, particularly about working patterns?
No, it's a very good idea, and it's something that before I joined the department, I worked in IT, and we actually trialled it. We had a similar sort of thing, but it was internal, to see what the demand would be like. So yes, it's a suggestion for us to incorporate into our thinking. So thank you.
I don't think there's any other questions. I would just, in fact, echo the point that Linda's made. I mean, I came from an industry where our head office departments, for various reasons, had to extend their hours greatly for various systems, and we thought it was going to be a major problem. And in actual fact, we had people queuing up to join because, as Linda, I think, has correctly pointed out, it fitted their lifestyle. So we'd have lots of married couples where one would do the early shift so the other one could do the school run. They would then leave to pick the kids up from school and do tea, while the other one came in to do the second shift. So in actual fact, we benefited greatly from recruitment in an area where we thought it was almost going to be impossible to recruit. So it was converse to what we thought was going to happen. And that, I suspect, might well be the case here. Sorry? But we'd urge you to explore it just to see what the options are anyway. And as I said, thank you for recognising the issues that are there. And I think it's just, again, putting the customer at the heart of what we do in each way we can, and stop that telling one person one thing then passing it on to another. So I think there's uniformity of feeling in the committee that a separate direct line for adults and communities would be beneficial rather than going through the call centre. I think we'd echo the point you've made. No further questions? Again, thanks for joining us, Steve.
All right, thank you.
We're now moving on to agenda item 14, which is the Learning Disability Employment Performance Update, which is on pages 143 to 148 of the agenda pack. And we're now joined by Heather, I saw was there, and Heather's gone big screen now. So welcome, Heather, nice to see you again. Are we going straight to Heather, John? Straight to you, Heather, please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity of presenting the LD employment update. We presented this some time ago, and we were proud to say that we were in the top quartile of local authorities for this achievement and outcome for adult social care outcomes framework measures. That's not to say that we haven't got a long way to go. It is, I think, just to prove that for local authorities, this is a challenge across the board. The Care Act 2014 gave councils responsibility for ensuring a wide range of good quality care and support services, and that included services to support people into work. We have the Adult Social Care Strategy 2020 to 2024 and support with the Whole Life Disability Strategy. And we obviously have our SEND young people who we feel it's crucial to support into employment from their education. If I turn to the ASCOF performance measures, as I've said, we have had good performance over the last few years. The ASCOF measures the proportion of adults with learning disabilities who are receiving long-term services and are in paid employment. There are approximately 2,500 people with learning disabilities registered in Leicestershire, and of them you can see that only 1,405 people have services. In 2021, our performance was 10.5%, which was 148 people out of 1,405, and it was in the top 25 of authorities in England. During 2021-22, performance did fall to 9%, which equals 113 people out of the now 1,253 people who are registered with services. The registered with services is a key measure here, because obviously people who have more profound learning disabilities and those people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities are the people who are most likely to be receiving services from us, and they're the people we're measuring in paid employment. The breakdown of those people receiving services is in paragraph 8, and you'll see that 113 are recorded as in paid work, of whom 77 work less than 16 hours per week and 36 more than 16 hours a week. Those figures are important because one of our barriers for LD people in employment is the loss of benefits for people who work more than 16 hours a week and get paid, and the reluctance of parent carers to enter into that partnership with us to prepare people for work when they can clearly see that there is a risk to the benefits that people are receiving unless they can secure more highly paid work. We have 1,140 who are not actively seeking work, and that will be for a range of reasons, and you'll appreciate that quite a lot of our people who are receiving services long term with profound and multiple learning disabilities aren't in a position to seek work or to be receive training and support for work. I've already mentioned the benefit element, and that is a key element when we're discussing with service users and carers the job opportunities where that can be. We also have where people do need support when they're in work for physical disabilities or for learning disabilities. The access to work support, I think, is fairly lacking in support workers who can support people with a learning disability. They're much more adept at providing support for people with physical disabilities, but the two combined, I think, prove fairly difficult to recruit into. We do have also low unemployment rates in Leicestershire, which means there aren't the job availability that we would want to be seeking. But we do have 30 people who are seeking employment status, and they are being actively supported through our community enablement workers to look at that readiness for work. We do record people who are against this measure, but we can only record voluntary work if that's also paid. I think it's fair to say that we have a lot of people with learning disabilities who are successful in voluntary work, and that's seen as a predecessor to employment status if we can use that and progress people through that. As you would expect, COVID had a significant effect on new employment opportunities, and indeed employment opportunities continuing for people with learning disability. And preparation has in the main been paused over the last 2 years. People with learning disabilities haven't had the opportunity to go into building-based workplaces, and they've also been very anxious and very cautious about doing so. We are seeing a slow return, but that is a slow return, and the work that we did with people previously has to be started again, I'm afraid, because that work has been lost. It also affected the community life choices providers who had to close some services, and when they were reopening on a very limited capacity basement. They also had their restrictions around people accessing the communities and doing the training that they needed to do and the experience gathering that they needed to do for preparing them for work and employment. As I've said, numbers of adults with LD in employment remain good, and the voluntary work opportunities are beginning to resume, and we are seeing people returning back to their voluntary commitments. Interestingly, nationally, the employment rates for males with LD are higher than females with LD, and in Leicestershire that still holds true, although we are higher in both counts than the national average. Our Community Life Choices Services was reopened on the 27th of April 2022 to allow other organisations demonstrating the required standards to enter the framework. And we do have a total at the moment of 8 CLC providers who have declared their interest in supporting us with, particularly with employment opportunities for people with learning disabilities going forward. We have submitted an expression of interest in a Department of Work and Pensions project, which would enable 20 selected local authorities to be awarded funding to support adults The criteria and the regime is quite taxing, and it would include quite a considerable staff resource and financial resource to match fund the grant. So we are also looking at a more sustainable local approach, which could prove more cost effective, working with our CLC providers and other large employers in Leicestershire, where we can do this probably on a local footprint. The council is preparing a response to the newly announced Multiply project as part of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. It's early days yet, and we're yet to see the outcome of that and some of the finer detail of how we would need to be involved with that. As I've already said, should we be successful in the DWP scheme, we would need to find staff resources and funding for that. And needless to say, any of the options that we go forward with need really to be considered as an investor save, moving people away from funded services and more into independence and activities in the community and jobs that mean that they will be self-sufficient and more independent in the future. I hope that future reports will see a greater success in our endeavours to support people into employment. It continues to be a challenge, but it is one that we are very much up for and supports the promoting independence, which is our ANC strategy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Heather. First question's from Linda.
Thank you, Chair. I'm presuming that when we're looking at people with learning disabilities, we're looking at people that not only access Leicestershire County Council services, but people that are going into the independent sector as well. They're being encouraged to look at, rather than somebody sitting in a day centre, dare I call it a day centre now, that they are looking at ways for them to be put into employment. Reading the whole thing, people that are transitioning from children's service into adult services, that appears to me to be a good opportunity for somebody with a mild or moderate learning disability to look at employment rather than day services as such. The idea behind it is good, but it is managing somebody's expectations as well. I know from years ago, the job for somebody with a learning disability was collecting the trolleys in a supermarket. But people with a learning disability, some of them have a higher expectation than that. They want to do something meaningful. They want to be able to go to a college and learn how to do something. And some of them are quite successful doing it. I mean, I mentioned this morning that a gentleman that I used to key work in Wigston at the garden project there, his mother died, and he went into accommodation in Melton, and I went to Gates's garden centre, and he came dashing up to me to say how brilliant it was and that he now worked there and loved it. So his expectation had been met, which was fantastic. And if we can capture people earlier as they come into the adult system, would be fantastic. Like I say, as long as their expectation is managed. But it's a good report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please respond, Heather.
Okay, thank you. So yes, most of our community life choices services, including day services, are independently commissioned now. And we had a report earlier in the year about the feedback from the consultation for closing our own day services and investing more in the independent sector. As I previously said, we've recently reprocured that independent sector Community Life Choices contract and had more people come on board who are really interested in progressing people through employment. And you'll know that previous reports have indicated that our independent providers have gone into looking at social enterprises and small businesses, and quite a lot of our traditional day services have been replaced by preparing people for work and running their own businesses, etc. You'll know when you wander around County Hall, we have a number of people with learning disabilities who are actively employed in the department and in the council, day-to-day businesses. And business support also offer apprenticeships for people. So we're all doing our bit. But yes, most of the services that we now commission, that we for Community Life Choices, are the independent sector, and it's proving to be successful for us.
Barry?
Thank you, Chair. I noticed from paragraph 9 and 13, as you say, our employment rates in Leicestershire are amongst the highest in the country. If we had the adverse of that, we'd obviously be trawling over those figures to see what we're doing wrong. So in this case, do we go over this to understand what we're doing right, to make sure that we capitalise on that, and maybe even help other areas understand what it is that's working well here to increase that across the country?
Yes, thank you for that. We are one of the highest. We could be higher, and those figures aren't very high, are they? So whilst we celebrate that, that's our achievement, we would want to see them higher. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
It's just if we understand why they're higher, so that we make sure we continue doing whatever it is we're doing right.
Through the ADAS network, we have been asked to share that, and we have showcased really the providers who have looked at doing businesses and micro enterprises and training people. So I think whilst we are doing well and we can showcase what we're doing well, as I've said, we could hope to do better, and we could learn from the independent providers really how we can support people doing that. Some of the barriers, we need partners to help us. So employers need to be more aware and come on board. And I think we have got some excellent advocates who are employment, who've had that struggle and come through the other side and can be advocates for other people. And I think those people who have gone through that journey are probably the best people to say how well that's been for them and what could be improved to other authorities. So, I'm very proud of the services and the people that we've seen through those services.
Just one last one from me, Heather, then, if I may. You seem slightly disappointed with the figures, which seems in contradiction to our percentage compared to the rest of the country. So I think we should celebrate success in this case, and rather than be too hard on ourselves. I suppose my question is that, and this is a sort of perennial issue with the performance report, which I know poor Matt's going to come on to in a minute, but we show ourselves as red, whereas to me, clearly and comprehensively, it should be green. If we're leading the country, I think our target is wrong. So to me, the crucial factor is, of the 1,140 not actively seeking work, which is the pool we're talking about, how many of those would be capable of seeking work? Because clearly an awful lot of them, through no fault of their own, are going to be able to, because they've got learning difficulties, they've possibly got physical disabilities as well. So with the best will in the world, much as they might want to, they're not going to be able to. And therefore, to me, the target should be measured against the pool of people that would be capable of working. So I don't know if there's anything we can do on the ASCOF scale to actually identify the pool and our percentage against the pool that are available, as opposed to our percentage, which we just seem to measure against the previous year, which seems nonsensical to me. So I'd urge Matt, if he's able to change that scale when he comes on to it, because I think we do ourselves a disservice in Leicestershire by showing this. People looking at that chart will just think they're doing something wrong. We're doing something very right, And I think we should celebrate that success in it. So I would urge you to get together with Matt to change that and to see if we can identify out of that, I said that 1,140 you mentioned in paragraph 8, just how many of those, which I suspect is probably a low number from what you've said, going forward.
Thank you. I would say that a drop of 1% in the COVID pandemic is a big, is a big achievement. I did expect us to have dropped a lot more than 1%, but we didn't. So that is celebrating.
So take away the message, I think, from all of us. The team are doing a great job. If we could just understand it and change those metrics we're looking against in that chart, I for one, I'm sure the rest of the committee will be grateful, because I think it just doesn't show what Leicestershire are doing. And this is above party politics. This is about celebrating the success that you and your officers are achieving in working with these people. And I suppose I should have issued a health warning, and that other garden centres are available. That's what they always, that's what they always say, isn't it? So thanks very much, Heather.
Thank you.
We're now going on to the last agenda item, which is which I've already alluded to, is the Provisional Performance Report 2021-2022, which is pages 149 to 164 on the agenda, and we've got Matt Williams joining us. What I'll tell you, Matt, is don't worry about going through the report, just highlight any 2 or 3 things that you think are meritorious, and to explain to us how you're going to change the ASCOF targets for people with learning disabilities.
Yeah, just kicking off maybe with that one, and given that was the previous conversation, it is a national metric. There's little we can do on its actual definition and calculation. Saying that, I think the comment made in that previous item about perhaps working with Heather and colleagues to look at the small number of people that are seeking work could be an option, and maybe being a little less harsh on ourselves around the target setting. Where I think we often set ourselves quite a substantial target, and as has been shown in Appendix A, we are in a good position when you compare us nationally within the country. So yes, I'll pick that up with the department and see where we can go with that in the monitoring in the coming year. I'll keep it brief then, Chair, in terms of some of the key points just coming out of the performance report. A minor one perhaps at this stage is just to note that these are kind of provisional figures. I don't think they'll change a lot, but clearly the final publication of these will be from NHS Digital, and that will be in the autumn. I think another key point just as background is COVID. I know probably when I've been here in previous occasions, and certainly this time last year, COVID was having an impact on figures. We're now seeing the bounce back from that in some ways. So what year would it have been? It would have been year 2021 was heavily affected by the early stages of the pandemic. We're seeing ourselves change quite a bit through the latter 12 months. So consequently, when we compare year on year, we're seeing quite a shift again. So COVID is still having a marked effect on these last few years. We saw that quite a bit through communities, through both our library provision and our heritage provision, where we saw an improvement in numbers coming back through the year. We also saw it through our on our adult social care side, where reablement, which was the service that was probably most impacted in terms of figures in that first year of the pandemic, that's bounced back quite nicely through 21-22, and certainly the outcomes for those measures are looking good. I think there's still scope to improve the number of people passing through that service, but certainly the outcomes that we're seeing are back up to where they were pre-pandemic. I think just touching on one of the earlier items this afternoon on the carer strategy, paragraph 15 in the performance report picks up some of these areas of concern about the responses with regards to the survey that we undertake of carers, certainly around finding information and having social contact. I think in that paragraph I did note it's going to be useful to see the national context on that. That'll be published later in the year to see whether that shift downwards in terms of feedback in Leicestershire mirrors what we see at a national level, and I'll definitely be looking into that and bringing that back to the committee later in the year. Permanent submissions into care again was certainly an area where we saw a shift from just before pandemic into last year. We saw an increasing number of admissions. we weren't able to keep it as low as what it had been in that first pandemic year. We're still in a good position in the sense that I think we'll be around that national average, and we're still lower than where we were pre-pandemic. I think if I'm trying to keep it short, Chair, that's probably all I would like to say. As I said, some national context I think is going to be key to the last 12 months. That will be released in the autumn, and I'll certainly be bringing that as a benchmarking paper to the committee in January next year, I believe. I can leave it there and pick up any questions or further information people require.
Thanks very much, Matt. I know Jules got lots of questions for you. He told us earlier this morning.
Cheers, thank you, Chair. First one, I looked at the green, and it's nice that it's green, but I didn't understand why you'd lumped in web visits with library visits.
Okay, yeah,
so
yeah.
What was the methodology on that one, and how do we know if more people are physically visiting our libraries?
Sure. The decision to include website visits was taken a couple of years ago. It might have actually been before COVID struck, really. But it was about trying to capture the whole kind of library resource. So there's a lot on the website, and certainly they've got the catalogue on the website. So we wanted to ensure that we were somehow including them in our figures, and in this idea of shifting times. And it wasn't necessarily just about people coming into the library, but accessing, as I said, the notable resource that is online. We do have a breakdown of that. So I think in the Appendix A, the figure for the year was like 562,000 overall. Those going to the website was 210,000, and those that were actually physical footfall into the libraries was 352,000. So still a considerable higher number taking a physical approach to a library service, but we don't want to underestimate the use of the resource that's online, hence the reason they're joined together.
On that one, on the website visit, I think it should be split, and I'll tell you why. Because I googled Loughborough Library opening times, and it took me to the website, so that would count as a visit, even though I was on there for a millisecond, just to set the opening times, because my daughter wanted to do some revision on a Saturday. So I don't see the value of measuring the website visit unless we can calculate the depth of the visit, if you know what I mean. Is if I'm accessing resources and I'm spending an hour on the website, then I say that's a visit. If I've just clicked through to see the opening times and it's a 2 or 3 second visit, then we shouldn't be recording that, really, surely, because that's not really a visit, that's just information gathering. And is there any way of separating those two? Because I'd rather know if our physical libraries are worth investing in the future. I'm sure they are, but if footfall are falling through, we want to know why that's happening, and if there's anything that we can do to stem that loss of visits, because you've said there was 350,000, but yes, it's pandemic, but how is that as a barometer of the years have gone by? And if you're if you're putting web visits on that one, then we will never know that information, because it'll all be hidden in there.
Sure, we can certainly split website or online visits compared to footfall, as I've just outlined. I doubt very much whether we're able to understand what those web visits were about. So I think the first protocol is for me to have a conversation perhaps with the department about the target that we set around that kind of involvement with the making use of the service, and whether we do go for just back to a footfall only, or whether we do both but split them apart, so you can at least see some trends on both sides.
A further question on a red one, actually, and most of the red ones, funnily enough, are to do with care, and we're here sitting on care. So is some of that related because of pandemic, because people couldn't access care, and now we're coming out the other side and they're accessing care, and we've got a backlog? Because I'm concerned that quite a few of them are just red. And if you look on pages, if you just further down, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them I can spot here. So I didn't know if there was a bit of a lag. And if you want me to point you to a page, 157, 158. So
Yes, you're correct. There are a number of reds in there. And one could argue it's the way we actually monitor our performance at the end of the year. So we set a target, and did we meet it or did we not? Which is perhaps a slightly short-sighted way of doing it. And I certainly, as I've touched on with the carer survey, I do like the idea of having national context considered when looking at performance. So the targets that we're looking at today and are clearly showing red were set 12 months ago, when we've just come back off that first year, as I said, of post-pandemic or as the pandemic started. It was very difficult to try and understand where the next 12 months of service delivery would go in terms of being able to measure it and understand that against a kind of success criteria. So I think there's an argument here that perhaps some of it might be down to target setting, etc. I'm just looking on my screen here at some of those we talk about. We've talked about people with learning disabilities in employment. That's come out as red, and again we've already touched on where that lies as a high performer nationally. And there's a secondary one around learning disabilities, and that's people in settled accommodation. We set ourselves a target of 86%. We came in at just over 84%, and I've classed that as red. I think potentially you could argue it's above national average. You know, we're in a good position nationally. We're not as high as we are with our employment figures, but we're doing okay. So to be just a percentage point or a bit more off and classing it as red could be something that we need to consider really in a way that we kind of describe how we're getting on with our performance. I don't know whether John wants anything from a more operational perspective on that.
No, thanks, Matt. I was just going to... this isn't... an I told you so question or anything, but part of the reason why we set those targets in the way that we do is that we did receive some comment previously from this committee that we were setting targets which weren't aspirational enough. So if you take the employment one, for example, we knew that we were going to probably be facing a difficult couple of years, and we knew that we'd probably need to set a lower target, but committee criticised us for setting a target which was below our current performance. So we set a higher target. On that basis, I mean, I'm very happy to look at how we set the targets, and as Matt said, you know, rather than just looking at the previous year and saying, can we stretch that, we could certainly just look at a target in terms of where we benchmark nationally or regionally. And if you looked at these figures against the regional and the national benchmarks, those two reds would be greens, for example. So it's about what story we want to tell a little bit, and it's a little bit about... I do think we should stretch ourselves. I mean, I don't want to sit here as a director and suggest that we shouldn't try and improve, because we should always be looking for continuous improvement. But perhaps within the performance reports, we just need to be a bit clearer about perhaps how Leicestershire compares to other authorities, not just how we compare to last year's performance.
Hilary.
I have to agree with John. We are in danger of setting unrealistic, and it's better to do it as a benchmark against another one of our comparative counsellors, whether nationally. Otherwise, people look through, they miss all the green, they miss the amber, they go straight to the red and think it's a failure. In another position I held for about 7 years within another council, district council, we had 2 items that were permanently red for 7 years, and every meeting we went over and over it. They were completely unrealistic. And I'll give you the example, how was Charnwood Borough Council with a university, and some other people in this room know this, our waste collection for recycling was supposed to be in the mid 50%. I mean, because it had been set unrealistically, but it focuses people on that. Now, I agree with you, you've got to stretch it, but you've got to stretch it within the capabilities of the department, of our makeup. We're a very varied council. The county council dynamically is hugely varied. So stretch, but don't go over the top because otherwise I don't sit regularly. I'm subbing today, but you know, I could come back to another one of these meetings in this time next year and it could be the same colour again. And it's not that the department's failed at all. That's all I'll say, Chair.
I have a slightly different recollection to John about our discussion on targets. I'm sure John will be right because he's probably read the minutes. But my recollection of what the minutes said is that we were looking at almost a dual track approach of, yes, aspirational targets for Leicestershire County Council. So there was, in some ways, reporting against how we achieve nationally, which I think we do very well on every level. There's nothing wrong with having a red on our internal sheet that says we didn't hit our aspirational target, and then coming to the point that's already been made about, is that aspirational target ever achievable? So to me, it was. I think when we discussed it before, we asked if there was almost a second column we could have, which was the Leicestershire target and how we're done against nationally. So on every level, particularly if you come back to where we started this on learning disabilities, people in employment, we're doing brilliantly. Now, we haven't hit our aspirational target, and I think you saw the passion that Heather put into it about, I'm going to get this target if it kills me, which is brilliant to see because she's obviously got a team under her who want to achieve that target. And what we were discussing with Heather was, is that target you're setting yourself ever likely to be achievable? But on any measure, we should never be red on that one. I don't mind us being red with Heather being disappointed because she wants 10.5% and she will get it if it kills her to get it. But I think if we achieve that green at 10.5%, we're so far above the national trend, it really is a measure for celebration. So I just wonder if there's a bit of finessing we could do with these for continuing to stretch ourselves, which is where you want to be, John, and I certainly applaud that personally. I'm sure the committee do, that we don't just want to be second or third or fourth best. We want to be the top if we can. But I just think there's that, as Hilary says, I think we've got to be careful that as a council, we don't do ourselves a disservice in the public perception about just seeing red, because people see red and it's instantly bad. I would make some arguments that some of the green ones aren't as good as they should be, rather than some of the red ones. And I think perhaps that's something, you know, if you can take away, Matt, and think about, is there a slightly different way of doing this, which might mean almost, you know, 2 reports, you know, a Leicester aspirational report and a one against the national standard and where we are.
Yes, I definitely think there's an option there, Chair, and I think maybe the definitions around the use of colour that we have in the report is something we could reflect on. Again, red, amber, green, slightly blunt approach to it, and I like the idea of having that dual aspect that you've outlined there.
Yeah, I've just follow up as well. We do have 2 columns. So we do have the target, which is the local target, and then we have the column which is the quartile, which is the national benchmarking, but we don't colour code that one. And perhaps, you know, so maybe a bit of balance there that we could do. The other thing we could look at is, on some of the targets, we put a range in, as opposed to a single figure. So for LD employment, for example, we could have said, well, actually, we know that it's going to be tricky through COVID, but we still want to push ourselves to do the best we can. So perhaps what we should have had was a range rather than a single figure, and that way we'd have probably hit the range. So maybe we could be a bit more nuanced as well in terms of some of the hard targets.
Up on that, if you look at that one that John's just picked up on, LD and employment, target was 10.5. We achieved 9, and we were up, and I think in the quartile we're top, but we're still red, which is the Leicestershire target. But with you saying that top bit should be a different colour, or a colour, because the other one we looked at, the next one down, people in LD in settled accommodation, we're second. Well, you know, that would be a silver medal, and we'd already got a gold medal. So I think it is There's another one further down. I won't go through them all. Permanent admission into care. We're red, but we're top. And I think that can confuse some of the public. And at times it can be, we have to look at our staff and the people that are working so hard. And it can be a bit disheartening to say, well, we're top in the country, but we're still red. And I think, so I agree, have a look at it and see if we can be encouraging, but aspirational.
I think there are two aspects. Number one, I'm sure the minutes will state that for the first time in history that members have told officers they're being too hard on themselves. So that needs to be recorded. But secondly, I think it's right what's being said that, a range makes sense because our range would still have a minimum that was way above the national average, and a level we do not want to go beyond, because if you're being successful, you don't want to drop back too far, so there's got to be a minimum. But I think there's got to be scope for taking into account the circumstances. I mean, I think the point was well made, wasn't it, by Heather on the learning disabilities one, of she expected it to be considerably lower because of COVID, and it's therefore a credit to the team it wasn't. And if we don't take that circumstance into account, and what worries me about some of these charts is you'll get some strange civil servant sitting in London who thinks, well, Leicestershire are rubbish because they're red.
Yeah.
Whereas in actual fact, they won't bother to read the figures.
No.
It's a bit like civil servants don't read housing numbers, isn't it? So when a planning authority sets a target for affordable homes, the civil service take the target, they don't count delivery against the target, which is always a bit weird in the world. So I think we've got to be careful that we set the right approach for us to be higher performing, which we don't want to move away from, but obviously be realistic in the fact that other people look at these and won't understand them in the same way we've had the benefit of understanding them. It's a bit like where we started today with Barry saying, I know these things because I'm a counsellor. How do we make sure everybody knows them? Somebody looking at these will not understand the context they're being put in. So thanks for that. We've probably caused you a lot more work, Matt, but you generally come along to these and get no questions and no. So to send you away with several questions and lots of work would seem only a fair target for one of these meetings, which we've now done.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
So thanks again, Matt.
Thank you.
Right. I think we've now reached the end of the agenda.
Yes, we have.
So the date of, well, I think it's, I'll just say before I close, I think it's been an excellent meeting. I think we've had a whole range of questions. I think we've asked some probing questions. I think we've given lots of thought for Cabinet to consider on several aspects and things that we know are going to be important to come back to us to monitor. So thanks to everybody for their participation today. I won't forget the date of the next meeting because it's on my wife's birthday. So at least it's a good excuse not to take her out to lunch. So the next meeting is scheduled to take place on the 5th of September 2022 at 2 p.m. and the public now know my wife's birthday date. There are no urgent items, so thank you all, and I close the meeting.
Thank you.